No one could believe their eyes when a billionaire knelt in the dust, pleading with a beggar to marry her. The question on everyone's lips was simple. Why? Angela Peters, the Iron Lady of Lagos real estate, the billionaire whose name commanded respect, was on her knees in the churchyard. Service had just ended, and worshippers still lingered at the steps, chatting and greeting one another. Her elegant green dress gathered dirt at the hem as she lowered herself onto her knees. One hand clutched a velvet box, its lid open to reveal a diamond ring, catching the afternoon sun. "Please, marry me," Angela pleaded. Her voice trembled, but the words rang clear. Gasps erupted instantly. A woman drew her children close as if shielding them from shame. Two teenage boys whispered to each other, barely containing laughter. An older man clicked his tongue and muttered, "Disgrace." The murmurs thickened until the churchyard buzzed with disbelief. The man before her stood stiff and awkward, his figure a striking contrast to her poise. Daniel wore a faded shirt and trousers, so worn they threatened to tear at the seams. His shoes had lost their soles, and a frayed bag hung from one shoulder. Dust clung to his hair and skin, but his eyes, dark, steady, and searching, met hers with a weight that silenced him. He made no move to take the ring. His hands twitched at his sides, uncertain. Angela's face glistened with sweat, but her gaze did not falter. "I do not care what they say," she continued, her voice carrying above the whispers. "I only care about the truth of your heart." From the crowd, a young man snorted. "Unbelievable! A billionaire begging a beggar. Wonders will never end." His companions chuckled, their voices cruel enough to sting, yet Angela kept her focus on Daniel. Daniel swallowed hard. He shook his head slowly, as though the sight before him was too heavy to process. His lips parted, then closed again. For a moment he looked as if he might reach for her hand, but instead he stepped back. The small movement sent a ripple of disappointment through the onlookers. "Angela," he said at last, his voice hoarse but firm, "stand up. You should not be doing this." The crowd erupted with louder murmurs. Some shook their heads in pity, others recorded gleefully, their phones angled to capture her humiliation. Angela's driver stood by the sleek black Bentley parked nearby, his face lowered in embarrassment. But Angela did not flinch. "I will not stand," she replied, the ring trembling in her hand. "I have lived with wealth, but I have never lived with truth. Daniel, I see truth in you, even when the world refuses to look." Her words cut through him. Daniel's jaw tightened, his brow furrowed, and a flicker of pain crossed his face. He glanced at the people around them, their judgmental stares, their mocking whispers, and then back at her. His eyes glistened, not with pride but with shame. "You do not understand," he muttered, his voice low but audible. "This is wrong." Angela's hand shook harder. The ring felt suddenly heavy, as though it carried the weight of every choice she had ever made. For years she had hidden behind boardroom tables and polished speeches, never daring to show weakness. Yet here she was, on her knees in front of strangers, risking ridicule for the only thing her heart still longed for. Daniel stepped back again. The space between them widened, and with it came the sharp sting of rejection. His eyes held hers one last time, eyes filled with conflict, fear, and something unspoken, before he turned away. The crowd gasped louder. Phones followed his every step as he walked past the church gate and down the road, his bag slung across his shoulder. He did not look back. Angela's chest constricted. Her knees ached against the ground, but she stayed frozen, the box slipping from her trembling fingers into the dust. The diamond glinted helplessly against the earth, a symbol of love offered and refused. Around her the noise swelled. Some women shook their heads, whispering prayers of pity. A man laughed and said, "Even a beggar rejected her." Children pointed and giggled until their mothers hushed them. For the crowd, this was entertainment, gossip to carry into the week. For Angela, it was devastation, but not defeat. Her eyes followed Daniel's retreating figure until he vanished into the busy street. Slowly, she closed the empty box and held it to her chest. Humiliation burned her skin, but beneath it flickered determination. The crowd could mock, her family could scorn, and Daniel could walk away. But Angela knew in her heart this was not the end, because love, True love was never won in a single moment, and she was ready to fight for him. Long before Angela found herself kneeling in the dust outside the church, her life had been one carefully built around appearances. To the public, she was the epitome of success. A billionaire real estate mogul, a single mother who managed to rise above betrayal, and a woman who commanded respect in every boardroom she entered. To her family, she was a daughter who carried their legacy with pride. But behind closed doors, Angela carried scars that her wealth could never hide. Her marriage to Richard Peters had once been her anchor. He was charming, ambitious, and persuasive, the kind of man who could make her believe in forever. In their early years, they shared dreams, late nights planning projects, whispered promises of success, a family built on trust. Angela gave him everything, but as her empire grew, Richard's admiration soured into resentment. Instead of celebrating her success, he saw it as a threat. His voice grew cold, his eyes distant, until the day she learned the truth. Richard had not just withdrawn, he had betrayed her. He left her for another woman, abandoning both Angela and their young daughter Kemi, without looking back. The humiliation cut deep, but the greater wound was his indifference to the family they had built. Angela hardened that day. Love, she decided, was a trap. Men were not drawn to her heart, only to her fortune. Her mother, Margaret Peters, never stopped reminding her that time was running out. "You cannot carry this burden alone forever," Margaret would insist, her voice sharp with worry and pride. Angela's uncle, Francis Peters, echoed the same, pushing her toward honorable. Desmond Adeyemi, a wealthy politician with powerful ties. To them, Desmond was the perfect match. Influence joining wealth, status cemented in society. Angela saw through him immediately. Desmond's words were polished, his smile rehearsed, but his eyes lingered too long on her properties, her assets, her empire. He never asked about her fears, her dreams, or her daughter. He spoke as though he already owned her. Angela resisted, but the pressure from her family grew unbearable. It was on one of those restless evenings, after a bitter quarrel with her mother, and Margaret and her uncle Francis about Desmond, that Angela first noticed Daniel Okoro. Driving herself through the busy streets, she saw him crouched near a pavement, dust clinging to his worn trousers and a battered bag at his side. A small boy tugged at his shirt, eyes wide with hunger. Without hesitation, Daniel reached into his pocket and drew out half a loaf of bread. He broke it carefully, handed a piece to the boy, and smiled as the child devoured it. Angela's chest tightened. She had dined with men who owned jets, yet rarely had she seen such simple compassion. That image haunted her through the night, lingering even as she lay in her king-sized bed. Days later, she saw him again outside a bakery. This time he sat on the steps, scribbling into a tattered notebook. Ignoring the stares of passers-by, Angela approached him. "Do you need help?" she asked. Daniel looked up, eyes wary but steady. "No," he said simply, closing the notebook. His voice carried dignity, not desperation. "You gave food to a child the other day," Angela continued. "You could have kept it." Daniel's lips twitched faintly. "A hungry child needs it more than me." Angela was startled by the calm sincerity in his tone. For weeks afterward, she found herself seeking him out. Sometimes he carried heavy loads for market women, earning a few coins. Sometimes he read discarded newspapers with intensity. And sometimes he simply sat quietly, lost in thought. She began to speak with him more, learning fragments of his life. Though guarded, his honesty shone through every word. Her admiration grew until she could no longer deny it. Angela Peters, billionaire and single mother, was drawn to a man the world dismissed as nothing. She told herself it was madness, yet each night she thought of Daniel's eyes and the dignity he carried despite his ruin. To the crowd outside the church, Daniel Okoro was just another beggar. But Daniel had not always been invisible. Years earlier, he had been a brilliant engineer with a promising career. The son of a school teacher and a seamstress, Daniel worked tirelessly, graduated with honors, and quickly earned a position at a leading construction firm. By his early 30s, he co-founded an engineering company with two friends, Tunda Bakari and Chukanaji. Together, they dreamed of transforming the city's infrastructure. But dreams are fragile when greed enters. Tunde and Chuka siphoned money, forged Daniel's signature, and covered their tracks. When the scandal surfaced, Daniel believed the truth would save him. Instead, his friends betrayed him, presenting false documents that painted him as the culprit. The investigation was swift and merciless. His accounts were frozen, his reputation destroyed. Even his fiancée, Amaka, returned his ring with quiet finality. "I cannot live this life," she whispered before walking away. Homeless and penniless, Daniel carried what little he owned in a bag. He slept on pavements, bus stops, in abandoned buildings. Yet he refused to let bitterness consume him. He shared scraps of food with children, greeted strangers politely, and clung to dignity as his last possession. That was the man Angela saw, first giving bread to a hungry boy, then scribbling thoughts in a notebook outside a bakery. When she approached him, he felt exposed. Her perfume, her polished shoes, her quiet authority, they reminded him of the life he had lost. Pride forced him to push her away, even as something inside longed to draw closer. And yet, no matter how he tried to push her away, Angela returned. She would ask about his dreams, his past, his thoughts on the city's buildings, as if his opinion still mattered. One evening, when she found him reading a discarded book on bridge design, he confessed softly, "I used to build things. Now I can barely build a day for myself." Angela's silence that evening was not pity, but quiet respect. She looked at him as though he had just told her the most important truth she had ever heard. As Angela returned again and again, Daniel wrestled with conflicting emotions. He wanted her presence, but shame whispered he was unworthy. At night, lying on a mat behind an abandoned shop, he thought of her words. She spoke to him as though he was still a man of value, not a failure. Her eyes did not carry pity, they carried respect. Still, Daniel could not forget Tunde and Chuka's betrayal or Amaka's abandonment. He feared binding Angela's name to his ruin. He believed that love between them could only end in disaster. So when Angela knelt before him at the church, offering a diamond ring while the crowd jeered, Daniel's chest tightened with both longing and fear. A part of him wanted to lift her up, to accept the love she offered, but shame dragged him back. He could not let her gamble her reputation on a man branded by failure. "Stand up," he had told her. His voice trembled with the weight of every scar he carried. Then he walked away, leaving her on her knees, the crowd buzzing with disbelief. The world saw rejection, but Daniel knew the truth. He was not rejecting Angela. He was rejecting the hope he feared he did not deserve. That truth, however, was hidden from everyone else. By the time Angela returned home that evening, the whispers of the crowd had already grown into a storm across the city. In the quiet of her penthouse, with the city lights shimmering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, peace eluded her. The image of him walking away haunted her still. The tension in his jaw, the shadow of shame in his eyes, the way he carried himself with quiet dignity despite the jeers. She had knelt, offered her heart, and he had turned. The rejection, though unspoken, cut deeper than any insult she had endured in her business career. Her mother, Margaret Peters, did not see her pain in the same way. "Angela, what were you thinking?" Margaret's voice carried through the penthouse, sharp as glass. "Kneeling in the dust for a man like Daniel? You risked everything, your image, your reputation, your position. Desmond Adeyemi is waiting, a man who can protect you, strengthen the family name, and ensure your daughter Kemi's future. Not a street beggar." Angela clasped her hands tightly in her lap, struggling to maintain composure. "Mother, he is not just a beggar. He is a man who has lived through things you cannot understand. He has dignity, even if the world does not see it." Margaret shook her head. "Angela, dignity does not pay bills, does not open doors in politics, does not secure alliances. You are a Peters. We do not stumble for fools in the street." Uncle Francis, standing behind her mother, nodded vigorously. "She is right. You cannot let sentiment destroy what we have built. That man, Daniel Okoro, he is a symbol of chaos. He has no name, no standing. What will people say?" Angela swallowed hard. She could hear their logic, their calculations, but she felt her own pulse pushing back against them. Love, hope, human compassion. These were not currency in her world, and yet they throbbed within her. She had seen Daniel feed a child with his last piece of bread. She had seen him offer small kindnesses, protect the weak, and carry himself with a pride the city had stripped from him. That kind of strength was rare, more valuable than any title or fortune. The following day, Desmond Adeyemi appeared at her office, smiling as if nothing had occurred. He spoke of political plans, investments, and the potential merger of Angela's real estate ventures with his political influence. Angela listened politely, but felt a cold emptiness as she watched him glide over the floor in expensive shoes, shaking hands with her assistants as if he owned the building. "You need stability, Angela," he said finally, lowering his voice. "A man like me can give you what you want. A legacy, protection, influence, not some tragic figure pretending to be moral." Angela's lips pressed together. "I do not need a man to protect me," she said softly, though each word trembled. "I need someone who sees me, truly sees me, not my fortune." Desmond's smile faltered, and for the first time his polished composure cracked. He leaned closer, his tone urgent rather than calculating. "Angela, do you really think I do not see you? I see you, not the billionaire, not the businesswoman, but the woman who has carried so much alone. I know you want truth, and I swear I can give it to you. I love you, Angela. I have always loved you. Why can you not see that?" Angela studied him quietly, her chest tight. For a moment his words might have swayed her, but his eyes betrayed him, focused more on her empire than on her soul. She shook her head softly. "You see what you want to see, Desmond, but you do not see me." Later that evening, word of her church encounter spread faster than Angela could contain. Social media accounts published blurry images, captions ranging from mockery to speculation. Friends messaged, concerned. Colleagues whispered. Her family's warnings had transformed into public judgment. Margaret's phone never stopped ringing, and Uncle Francis's voice was a constant echo. "Angela, you are making a spectacle of yourself. Stop this foolishness before it ruins everything." Angela ignored the calls as best she could, but her mind returned to Daniel. Where was he now? She imagined him trudging through the alleys, carrying his battered bag, avoiding the gaze of those who would judge him. She imagined the loneliness that came with carrying scars no one could see. Scars inflicted by Tunde Bakari and Chukwunaji, the men who had destroyed his life. She imagined him remembering Amaka, his fiancée who abandoned him when he needed support the most. And despite all that, he remained kind. That evening, Daniel sat beneath the flickering streetlight outside a rundown bookstore. He had avoided the city center since the church incident, fearing both attention and embarrassment. The echoes of the crowd's whispers still rang in his ears. He clutched his notebook tightly, writing down thoughts, sketches of bridges and buildings, fragments of ideas he hoped would one day matter again. A sudden car door slammed, breaking the silence. He looked up to see Angela, stepping out of her sleek SUV, her heels clicking against the concrete. Her eyes met his, unwavering and burning with a determination he could not decipher. She approached slowly, ignoring the stares of passers-by. "I do not care what anyone thinks," she said, stopping a few feet from him. Her voice carried conviction, not arrogance. "I came to find you. You need to know, you are not alone." Daniel's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Pride warred with longing, shame warred with hope. He wanted to run, to protect her from himself, to spare her from the ruin he carried like a shadow. But something in her eyes told him she had already chosen to bear it with him. Behind them, a group of street youths whispered, pointing at the polished woman and the tattered man. Daniel caught snippets. "That's the billionaire woman, and that's him, the homeless guy." They laughed, cruel but ignorant. He felt the weight of their gaze like a physical blow, yet Angela did not flinch. She remained steady and resolute. He realized at that moment that whatever storm lay ahead, his betrayal by former friends, the weight of gossip, and the shadow of his own shame, he would face it differently. With Angela by his side, the judgment of the world no longer mattered, but the storm was only beginning. Messages arrived on Angela's phone. Desmond was furious, warning that if she continued to associate with Daniel, He would use his influence to cancel her company's government contracts and block her next estate project. He even hinted at dragging her into court for breach of promise, twisting her rejection of him into a legal threat. Margaret called repeatedly, her voice sharp with anger, accusing her of bringing shame on the family name and refusing to listen to reason. And in the background, Tunde and Chuka had somehow learned of her attempts to find Daniel. They saw an opportunity to manipulate the situation, to strike at Daniel once more through the woman who had dared to love him. Tunde Bakare and Chukwunaji were not content to let the past rest. When Angela's proposal to Daniel spread like wildfire, they saw an opportunity to bury him for good. If this woman raises him up, all our lies come back to haunt us. Chuka sneered over whiskey in a dim bar. Tunde leaned forward, his grin sly. Then we drown them both. We feed the press, twist the story, make her look like a fool and him like a con man. Soon, bloggers and newspapers buzzed with renewed accusations. Old documents, some of the very forgeries that had destroyed Daniel years before, suddenly resurfaced. This time, they claimed Daniel was manipulating Angela for her fortune. Headlines screamed of scandal, and Desmond Adeyemi seized the chance to call him a fraud from every podium. But lies cannot stand forever. Beneath the noise, one person chose to look closer. A young investigative journalist, Emeka Obasi, became intrigued by the story. Fresh out of university, Emeka had joined a small independent paper after larger outlets dismissed him for lacking experience. He was stubborn, curious, and had a reputation for chasing stories others ignored. When Angela's proposal went viral, he initially laughed like everyone else. But something about the documents circulating didn't sit right with him. The signatures looked inconsistent, the timeline suspicious. By day, Emeka combed through old court records. By night, he traced bank transfers, signatures, and hidden receipts. What he found shocked him. The same accounts that once implicated Daniel were still being used by Tunde Bakare and Chukwunaji themselves. Their greed had not ended with Daniel's ruin. They had simply shifted it into new ventures, believing no one would look twice. When Emeka confronted them, Tunde tried to bribe him, sliding an envelope across the table. Chuka hissed threats, warning him to stop before he got himself hurt. But Emeka pressed on. With Angela's quiet support, funding his protection, and giving him access to platforms, they could not bury the truth again. Piece by piece, the evidence mounted. Signatures that never matched Daniel's. Transaction trails leading directly into Tunde's offshore account. Testimonies from former employees who had been silenced with fear. By the time Emeka's report hit the front pages, the city no longer laughed at Daniel. They gasped in outrage at the men who had stolen his future. Angela watched the reports roll in on her television. The same society that once mocked her now turned its anger toward the real culprits. Her mother, Margaret, for once, had no words. Uncle Francis sank into his chair, stunned. This time, the truth moved faster than the lies. The storm outside her home grew louder the next morning. Television stations cut to live broadcasts as police vans surrounded the headquarters once ruled by Tunde Bakare and Chukwunaji. Officers marched through the glass doors with warrants in hand. Within minutes, the two men were led out in handcuffs, their defiance replaced by pale faces and trembling lips. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the city that once believed their lies now spat their names in disgust. By afternoon, the official notices arrived. Daniel's frozen accounts were restored, every stain of fraud erased from his record. 2 days later, the company he had co-founded announced his reinstatement as director, his name spoken with respect in the same boardroom where it had once been whispered with suspicion. Employees who had avoided him now greeted him with cautious admiration. For Daniel, it was not triumph that filled his chest, but relief. A long, heavy burden finally lifted. And yet, as he stood in the office that had once been his pride, overlooking the city skyline, he felt the emptiness that victories cannot fill. He had regained his name, his honor, his place, but his heart remained restless. The image of Angela kneeling in the dust haunted him still. The next Sunday, after service, the congregation spilled into the churchyard, greeting each other in bright wrappers and tailored suits. The air was alive with chatter, but a ripple of silence spread quickly when a familiar figure stepped into the yard. Daniel Okoro walked steadily toward the gate. He was not in rags this time, but in a simple, clean suit. His worn bag was gone, replaced by a posture that carried neither shame nor fear. The crowd recognized him instantly. Whispers rose. "That's him, the beggar she proposed to." Some scoffed, others watched with curiosity. Angela, walking alongside Margaret and Uncle Francis, froze when her eyes met his. For a long moment the world seemed to still. The place of her deepest humiliation now held him once more, and her chest tightened with questions she was afraid to voice. Daniel's steps slowed as he reached the exact spot where she had once knelt. He turned, facing her fully. Then, with the entire congregation as witness, he lowered himself to one knee. Gasps rippled through the yard. "Angela," he began, his voice steady though his hands trembled. "The day you knelt here for me, I walked away because I thought I was unworthy. I let shame rule me, and I turned from the only person who saw me when the world chose to look away." His eyes glistened as he continued. "But the truth has risen. The lies that buried me are gone. And today, I return not as a beggar, not as a man broken, but as a man who has found his dignity again. And I kneel before you to ask, will you marry me?" The crowd held its breath. Margaret's lips parted in shock. Francis's hand gripped his cane tightly, and murmurs rushed like wind through the compound. Angela's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking but sure. "Yes, Daniel." 1,000 times, yes, the crowd erupted, not with jeers but with applause and cheers. Some clapped cautiously, others shouted with joy. Even those who had mocked before now bowed their heads, humbled by the sight. Daniel rose, slipping the ring gently onto her finger. For a moment they stood together in silence, surrounded by the same gates that had once witnessed humiliation, but now bore testimony to redemption. And so, the man they once mocked as a fraud and the woman they ridiculed for kneeling in the dust became living proof that truth always rises. Daniel's name was restored, Angela's courage was vindicated, and together they found a love no amount of gossip could destroy. Their journey reminds us that dignity cannot be measured by wealth or status, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies in standing for what the world does not yet understand. Love built on truth can survive shame, betrayal, and judgment, and in the end it shines brighter than fortune or power. If this story touched your heart today, share in the comments what lesson you took from it, and remember to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful story coming your way. Thanks for watching Tales by Clara. Until next time, stay blessed.